a new live stream with Women on Boards and the Governance Institute called The Good, the Bad and the Governance. And today we're talking about what governance taught us in 2026. As the financial year ends, we're going to look back at the past financial year in Australian corporate governance in terms of lessons learned and what we might expect in FY27. So I am speaking with Julie Garland McLellan, an internationally recognised governance expert who has developed, written and delivered training programs for the Governance Institute of Australia and many other organisations as well. So hi, welcome Julie.
Hi, welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So let's start with the current KPMG scandal, which erupted on 24th of March when Labor Senator Deborah O'Neill used parliamentary privilege to allege that lead KPMG auditors on the Lend-Lease account had accessed confidential Lend-Lease board papers and kept documents in a locker. Since then, the story has dominated the business press. The chair, the CEO and audit managing partner have all resigned, and the KPMG brand and business are severely damaged. What are the governance implications from this corporate misconduct, which has come just 3 years after PwC suffered a similar fall from grace?
I think for me, they're governance and they're also leadership issues. The really important thing here is the culture. Why did people who worked for this company think it was okay to access a confidential document, store it in an insecure location, and share the contents with people who were not authorized to know it? You know, what was going on in the culture that made that sort of behavior okay? And I think that leads me on to the next point, which is conflicts of interest. And people always go, oh, yeah, that's just governance crud. But it's not. It's an absolutely fundamental aspect of doing business is that you're going to have conflicts of interest. You have to know what they are, and you have to be very specific about how you're going to manage them. So if you've got people advising the government on how to handle tax design, you don't have those same people advising companies on how to get around that design. Just creating banks have Chinese walls, consulting firms have Chinese walls, audit firms are supposed to have Chinese walls, but there's something going on when people aren't alert and thinking about conflicts. The other thing is something that's been growing in mentions over the past years, and there's a really excellent short course in the Governance Institute portfolio of courses about it, and that's the information governance. As a board, you are responsible for the information that your business has, and so you should be making sure that it's properly protected. And that is not just cybersecurity, it's ethics, it's culture, it's physical security, it's all sorts of things, it's education to a large extent. You've got to also think about what was going on in the leadership, and this sort of echoes right the way back to that AMP scandal when they made a disastrous CEO appointment. Have we chosen leaders simply because they generate revenue and therefore profit? Or have we chosen leaders because they are the people who embody the culture and the way in which we want this company to operate? And the other thing is, of course, reputation risk. KPMG is a very valuable brand, but it's been severely dented by this. And people often forget that reputation has a value. And even if it's not on the balance sheet, you should still be protecting it. So I think those are the big lessons for boards from that one. Also, the value of independence on the board, somebody who will question what's going on in the company because it might not be the right thing compared to other companies. So yeah, there's a lot of lessons in that one for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, March was a busy month because, of course, Federal Court Justice Michael Lee handed down his decision in the Star Casino matter, finding that the former CEO, Matthias Beckier, and former General Counsel, Paula Martin, breached their statutory duties of care and diligence, but dismissing the claims against Star's former non-executive directors.
Mm-hmm.
So, Julie, why is this very large 500-page decision one of the most significant Australian corporate governance decisions in decades?
It's a very interesting decision because the judge spent a lot of time talking about what would a reasonable director do. And knowing what's reasonable under your circumstances always helps you to do what's reasonable. Very hard to do things if you don't know what they are. But so I found, and you can download the document, it's still freely and easily available on Google. I found keyword searching it for the word reasonable, and just reading those sentences is a very, very valuable exercise. It's 500 pages long. He goes into Greek mythology occasionally. So some of his references might be a bit obscure, but it's, I think, one, very interesting because he reflects on what Justice Davis said in the Centro case. He reflects on some of the other decisions going right back to Neville Owen and HIH. So it really brings together a lot of the legal thinking. But the other thing that it does is, even though a few people have, in my opinion, erroneously said it let the directors off the hook, actually spending 2 years in deep legal battle to try to clear your name is not off the hook. You can almost guarantee the insurance won't cover all of the costs. It was a hugely complex case, and you can probably guarantee that those directors' careers will be on a substantially diminished trajectory from now on compared to what they expected before this happened. Mm. The other thing was, for me, and it's not one that's been highlighted, but for me, one of the exciting things was that duty of a director to bring that independent thinking and knowledge, how anyone could look at one casino that's in big trouble for money laundering, for consorting with the wrong sort of people, for failing to manage problem gambling, and assume that another casino, oh, no, we don't have those problems, and just be fobbed off. Directors are not supposed to be easily fob-offable. If you're easily fob-offable, go work somewhere else.
Love that term. Don't be easily fob-offable as a director. Well, with KPMG and Star dominating the last quarter particularly, focus was taken off some of the corporate governance shifts in Australia across FY 2026. Can you just give us a high-level summary of what some of these were?
Oh, God.
There was quite a lot, I know.
There was a huge lot. I was particularly happy to see the APRA proposed reforms softened slightly. Everyone I know in financial services boards tells me that APRA is a very active regulator, and that is great. But there comes a time when prescription just increases complexity and it doesn't help you to govern. So I was actually quite pleased to see what on the surface looks like governance being weakened. I actually think that strengthens it, because it then pushes the board back to their core duty of pursuing the best long-term interests of the company itself, and not getting sidetracked by ticking every box and reporting to regulators on very detailed elements. I also think things like the 10 years on director tenure, really? Does your independence suddenly evaporate, or do you become senile? There's no hard and fast research behind that. So I like to see boards actually saying what it is they're looking at in a director and saying, well, this guy's got this girl's got that. That's why we want these people, rather than, oh, this one's reached 9 years, we're going to swap them out for another one. So I was keen on that. ACSI, I don't do much with the big boards, but ACSI brought out the 12th edition of their governance guidelines. You'd know more about that than I do, I think, Claire. But they were really good, I think, in their requirement that boards understand and explain how diversity contributes to their company's strategy and performance, rather than just, oh, we've got 3 women, so we must be okay. It's like, no, we've got people from this background, we've got people from that gender, we've got people with this skill, we've got people with this cultural attribute, and this is how it's relevant, this is how it helps. Diversity is great, but there's a level of diversity which just becomes so complicated that it stops adding value. So for companies to say why these people are the best people, I think was a very good step. It's not enforceable, it's not mandatory, but I also liked the fact that they mentioned AI, succession planning, which goes back to that diversity issue, culture, and understanding your workforce capability. I think that one's a very big ask, but it'll be lovely to see boards trying to work out just how do you measure, and then when you've got a measure, is it good enough? Should it be higher? What do we do with that number? So I think that's going to be a good one. What else happened?
The ASX Corporate Governance Guidelines, which had a little bit of a sort of stop-start or start-stop, I think we'd probably say, in
Yes.
24, it seemed to be getting started again.
Thank goodness, because the old ones are definitely quite mature. I don't think they've stopped working, but I do think, and I think the principles are fantastic, but some of the detailed reporting is definitely getting a little bit past its use-by date. I was really glad that some of the proposals never made it through to a recommendation, because some of them were sort of working against diversity. Some of them were working against privacy and protecting of individuals. And a lot of them were very much around social justice rather than around governance performance, which is supposed to build better companies. So I was quite glad to see that. I think the sounds that we are hearing coming from the new committee, which is much more focused on corporate governance for corporate bodies, are very encouraging. I'm really looking forward to seeing what that committee puts out in future. And then the wider community, it's always going to be, I hope it's always going to be, if not, why not? The wider community can decide if they want to adopt or if they want to put forward a really good explanation for why not.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of regulation, charities that are regulated solely by the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission largely escaped any additional regulatory pressure or scrutiny in financial year 26. There is a bit of a kind of undercurrent that it's time for reform for the ACNC regulatory regime, particularly the one-size-fits-all approach applied to companies limited by guarantee who are registered as charities. What's your thoughts on that?
I actually was reasonably happy with what we had. I like a principles-based. I think when people start calling for, let's have some rules specifically for small charities, let's have some rules for members associations, let's have some rules for incorporated associations. All of these specific pleadings, whilst they have merit for the people making them, just go to add so much specificity that it becomes very difficult for a professional director to move across sectors, which is something we have to do if we're going to manage our conflicts of interest. And they just increase complexity without actually improving the ability of the board to make better decisions. So I'm kind of happy on that one.
Obviously, things like childcare and aged care sectors face multiple regulators, and they often face them in different state jurisdictions too, or at the national levels. There's been some quite big challenges for those two sectors in financial year 26, and they're not going to lessen, are they?
No, nor should they. They are sectors that deal with vulnerable people. They need to be well governed. But I also think there needs to be some understanding of just how difficult it is for those organizations, particularly the ones with historical liabilities that the current generation of directors and executives didn't contribute to, but could well become insolvent through trying to solve. You have to sympathize with directors who are in a position where they've joined an organization thinking they would help, and then they find that the organization, from some historical performance, which admittedly is inexcusable and should be punished, is going to kill the whole organization rather than just the people who were involved getting found and brought to justice. So I think that's a big issue for those organizations. The issue of getting directors who are willing to take the risk, because although people keep saying, oh, but Corporations Act liabilities have been turned off for directors in not-for-profits. Not all of them, no. Only 4 of them. All the rest are still there. And there's still civil liabilities and other things. So you can still lose your house, your savings, your reputation, and your liberty. So it is something to take on very seriously, especially if you're dealing with vulnerable people. Childcare frightens me witless. Why people would volunteer to look after someone else's children is way beyond my risk appetite. And yet there are other people who happily do it and tell me that mining is dangerous. So getting the right directors. And the other thing is the difficulty with some of the impositions of specific regulations around clinical governance and around the sort of staffing they have to have. It just makes it very hard to run a profitable business. And even if you're not for profit, you've got to be profitable. You've got to be able to fund yourself so that you can be sustainable.
So, Julie, what are some predictions for FY27 in the governance space?
I think the first one is that AI is not going to go away and disappear and let us all get back to our Neanderthal tendencies. I think AI is going to be more and more of a core boardroom topic. Workforce capability and culture. I think getting our heads around how do a bunch of directors, most of whom are independent, only occasionally in the organization, only occasionally interacting with it, how do they know what the company's people are capable of, what the culture is, and what issues are happening? And I think there's increasing appetite from various regulators to hold boards accountable for knowing what's going on. In fact, in the Financial Review today, there was a heartbreaking article about Fall Guy directors. People who just did not know what was going on in the company that they were on the board of. I read it and I thought, yeah, well, they were all technically fairly easily classified as negligent, but there's no specific skill set for being on a board. And some people will take advantage of that. And if you've got a pulse, or you can fog a mirror, or preferably both, they'll put you on a board and they won't care if you are harmed by being there. And I think getting that message across is a major issue for directors. It's an accountable appointment. You are there to take it all on your capable shoulders and manage it. I think people as well are starting to worry about how the board does what it does, not just what policies are on the website or what they say about everybody having wonderful executive careers before they joined the board. It's very much more about, well, these are good people, but how do they come together and act to actually create value for the company, for investors, or for the beneficiaries if you're a not-for-profit? I think ESG and climate is getting more and more mainstream. People are starting to be much more numbers-based and accountable. I'm not an expert, you can tell from the language, but if you are making any climate or ESG claims, you need to be able to back them up and substantiate them. Forward-looking claims, aspirations, very difficult area. And I think we'll see a lot of action on that. I think ESG as well is going to start to get permeated through everything companies do, rather than companies do what they do to make the money they want to make, and then they look at ESG separately. I think that's going to be brought together. I hope so. I think it'll make for better decisions. I think disclosures, particularly for those of us that are listed, but also for government boards, explaining not just, oh, that's what the law says, that's what the regs say, therefore this is what we did, but why did we do it? Why did we do it at that time and in that way? How can we prove as directors that we were careful and we were diligent and we were reasonable in our oversight and guidance of the company? And I think the other thing, which people like the superannuation investors are telling us loud and clear, is we've got all of this governance stuff and it's good stuff and we want it. But the number one thing we want you to do is build good companies. And company performance is the overall goal of the board, not pandering to any special interest, certainly not the director's own interest, but the company itself as a separate legal entity. That would be my wish list for next year.
Oh, wow. That's a great wish list, Julie. Couple of reminders for everybody, just as we end. You can still download the STAR decision, look up for the keyword reasonable. Great lot of takeaways there. Great example of how we can use AI to help us really well there as well. Also a reminder of that Governance Institute course around information governance, I think it was as well. So we might try and take a look for that link and find that and pop that out for you as well. Prescription, being prescriptive, which increases complexity, does not necessarily improve your governance. We really need to be looking at that principles-based governance, both in our NFP regulation space, but also in our corporate governance too for the private and listed sectors. So some really great takeaways there. If we do this again next year, we'll see what comes to pass. But Julie, thanks very much for joining us today.
One thing I forgot.
Oh, one thing you forgot?
Women on Boards has some great courses too, and directors need that practical education. You can't just pick it up in the boardroom on your way. So yeah, you forgot to give yourself a plug, so I'm going to give you one, and then we'll get on to plugging the good, the bad, and the governance.
Yeah, great. Thanks.